In today's episode of Shield Hero Cut Content, we're going to go through episodes 9 and 10, where a lot of the cut content centers around details regarding the story's secondary characters. Sure, there's still quite a few scenes I'll talk about that cover Naofumi, Philo, and Raphtalia's developing relationship, but we also get a closer look into Melromark's royal family, and the mentality of the other three heroes. So join me once again as I go through all the major things that the anime skipped from both the light novel and the manga. Episode 9, Melty, covering Volume 4, Chapters 13 to 15 from the manga, and Volume 3, Chapters 1 to 4 from the light novel. We start the episode with the party facing off against a horde of monsters for a job that Naofumi said he forced them to take. This job was a direct result of slaying the zombie dragon from last episode. With the dragon dead, new monsters had started making their way through the mountains, and because the village was near these mountains, these new monsters would occasionally approach and attack the village. So the villagers requested that Naofumi defend the village, at least until these monsters learned that it was a dangerous place to be approached. Of course, Naofumi was a bit reluctant, but after all the treatment that they gave to Raphtalia, he felt that he couldn't decline their request. It's during this job that we get a closer look at Naofumi's current mental state. Raphtalia had mentioned that she felt slower, likely due to the curse. Naofumi was very apologetic about the whole thing, constantly apologizing whenever he got the chance. But what he really thought was that it was all the other three heroes' faults. If they had just taken care of their problems thoroughly, he wouldn't have to keep cleaning up after them, and Raphtalia wouldn't be cursed. Raphtalia, being the saint she is, notices Naofumi's regret and makes him promise not to apologize anymore, because both her and Philo knew what they were getting into. She just wanted him to not have to worry about it so much, but it was very clearly having a pretty big toll on his conscience. Anyway, they finish up the job and start heading back to the village, which, as you know in the anime, is how they stumble across Melty. Given Melty's appearance, Naofumi's initial thoughts were that this girl would attempt to buy Philo from him. His reason being that many merchants in the past would offer him a lot of money in exchange for Philo. But rather than simply brushing them off, he would use that opportunity to redirect the conversation to his handmade accessories, and attempt to sell those instead. It was a pretty good method of gaining some extra cash. However, to Naofumi's surprise, Mel just looked like she wanted to be friends with Philo, as if she had a genuine interest in her. He took this opportunity to let Philo be around other kids, but that wasn't the only reason he lets her play. In the manga, he assumes she's the daughter of a rich traveling merchant, and he uses her interest in Philo to try to get on her good side and see if she could get her family to owe him a favor. It's an instance that highlights how Naofumi is always looking for ways to benefit himself. Sure, you can consider it selfish, but after all that's happened, I don't think you can really blame him. Naofumi and Raphtalia return to the village. Then, as evening comes, Philo returns from her playdate, and is so ecstatic that she'd made a new friend. This was actually her first friend. She proceeds to tell Naofumi about her whole day, but because Philo wasn't the greatest at conversations, as in she wasn't great at explaining what she wanted to say, Naofumi would generally not pay attention to her when she spoke. He'd only chime in from time to time to make it seem like he was listening, and this case wasn't any different. At least not until Melty walked in and explained her situation all over again. Naofumi thought that it would be troublesome to be found at the capital gates with the daughter of nobility, but he was persuaded by Philo and Raphtalia to accept the job. They begin their journey the next day, and it's during this trip that Raphtalia formally introduces herself to Mel. She explains their reason for going to the capital, as well as their current circumstances, talking about how she was cursed fighting an evil monster, and how they had to go get holy water in order to treat it. When they stop and make camp for the night, Naofumi watches as Philo and Melty play tag with each other. He comments on how it was nice for Philo to be getting along with someone her own age. But if we're being technical about it, at this point in the book, Philo has only been around for 2 weeks. So chronologically speaking, yeah, their ages don't really match up. It's a bit after that Philo brings out her bag of treasures to share with Melty. It was a bag she had hidden in the carriage, one that even Naofumi didn't really know about. Naofumi, curious as to what's in the bag, heads over to take a look, only to find within a bunch of broken swords, junky-looking jewels, and accessories that Naofumi had failed to craft properly. The common trait between all of them was that they were sparkly, and that was what made them treasures to Philo. It was likely something attributed to her nature as a bird, and their attraction to shiny items. To everyone else though, that would just be a bag of trash. From after this to when they get to the capital in the morning is pretty much the same. Though, before heading to the church, they first go to the weapon shop owner to stash their cart and count their money. Turns out, Naofumi had a pretty decent amount of coin, totaling to around 50 gold pieces. He then sells some of the equipment that they looted off the bandits, and then browses some new gear for himself and Raftalia. First, he buys Raftalia a new silver sword. This cost 10 gold pieces, but came with the blood clean coating effect that prevented blood and guts from sticking to the blade. Then he gets her an enchanted silver armor that takes into account the enemy's magic level and raises the wearer's defense proportionally. As for Naofumi, he couldn't decide on an armor, so the owner suggests an upgrade to his current one that will incorporate the dragon skin and core. Naofumi agrees and pays 5 gold pieces to cover the costs. Before they head to the church, Naofumi asks about the strange star that's appended to their levels. You see, at this point, both Philo and Raftalia were level 40 with a star next to their name. We know from the anime that this meant that they were ready for a class up upgrade. What this meant though was that they've reached the level cap of 40, and in order to keep leveling up, they needed to choose a more specific class that dictated the direction that they intended to grow. It's similar to the way that Elsword's job system worked. If you chose to class up, you'd receive a significant power boost from doing so, though in the country of Melromark, only knights, wizards, and adventurers were eligible for a class up, and you even had to get direct permission from the crown, meaning unless you were hand-picked by the crown, then your potential for growth would be limited, which basically meant that Naofumi would definitely not be able to class up anytime soon. They finally head to the church, where the interaction with the nuns and pope were pretty much the same. We're just told that the price of the holy water is dependent on the potency that you get, with 5 silvers being for the least potent and 100 silvers being for the most. Naofumi gets the highest quality holy water, then leaves the church only to be confronted by the young soldier. Assuming it was a trap from Bitch, aka Malty, he decides to run, which brings us to when he's confronted by Motoyasu. But instead of being immediately assaulted, Motoyasu first tells him that he knows he's been disguising himself as the saint with the god bird, and he orders him to hand over Philo so that they can execute it, not knowing that the bird that bodied him last time was the same angel he was trying to save from Naofumi. Refusing to hand over Philo, chaos then breaks out. That is until the young soldier steps in to interrupt the fight. Malty tries to continue it by declaring it as an official duel, but Naofumi, not having Philo or Raftalia to fight for him, worries that he'd lose yet again. In the light novel, that's when the young soldier stands his ground and even defies Malty's orders. He said that because the shield hero would be unable to fight, he would take his place. Now, a mere soldier challenging the spear hero was certainly nothing to laugh at. It was an incredible act of courage that left both Naofumi and Motoyasu speechless. A wizard then came out to join the soldier in the duel, which made Malty even more furious since things stopped going her way. She threatened them with treason and even said she was going to dispose of them afterwards, but they simply ignored her threats and stated that her position was irrelevant because they were merely carrying out orders of their own. That's when Melty enters the scene, and she pulls out her own decree that voided mine's previous one, declaring the duel illegal and disbanding it immediately. Malty's mere hesitation at this spurred a whole bunch of thoughts in Naofumi's head. Who was this young girl? Why was Malty backing down from her? Was it possible that Melty could have more power? All these questions raced through his head because of what he just witnessed. It's only after they go to the weapon shop to talk that he finds out that Melty is first in line to inherit the throne. At first he doesn't believe her, but after considering all of Malty's issues, it made a little bit more sense. Now, in the anime, we see Naofumi just tell her to leave, but in the manga, Naofumi's a lot angrier about the whole thing. Because of his trust issues, he turns the whole situation into a scenario where he's the victim. He sees it as a setup, where Melty was planted into the field around some Philolials to appear to be friendly with them and gain Philo's trust. Then she'd use Philo to get close to Naofumi, and when they'd least expect it, she'd betray him just like Malty did. This was how Naofumi interpreted it, and blinded by his own rage, he refused to listen to her any further. It's this scene that leads into episode 10, in the midst of turmoil, covering volume 3, chapters 4 to 9 in the light novel, and volume 4, chapters 15 to 16 in the manga. Melty is summoned by one of her knights to go meet the king, so she reluctantly leaves. As she leaves, we get this flashback of her and the queen. However, rather than the short 10 seconds of it that we see in the anime, the light novel actually dedicates a whole extra chapter to it. It's called Before I Met My Friend, and it basically covers, in great detail, the context behind Melty's visit to Melromark. The short version is that the queen was trying to get the king to stop mistreating the shield hero. At first, she sent soldiers, but the king ignored these soldiers' demands. Running out of patience, the queen decides to send Melty. Normally, she would have gone herself, but she had many negotiations with other kingdoms to take care of. However, because the king often respected Melty's opinion, the queen thought that Melty would be able to take care of the job. Melty was well aware of her parents' deteriorating relationship. One time at night, she even saw her mother burning portraits of her father. Melty knew that if nothing was to be done, then surely their relationship would fall apart completely, and that was something that Melty didn't want to see happen. You see, she's actually quite the caring person, and although the king might be a scumbag, he's still her father and a member of the family. So she quickly boards a carriage to Melromark, which leads to the journey that results in her getting lost in the forest. But back to the weapon shop now. After Melty leaves, the young soldier we see didn't quite barge into the shop like how we saw. A group of them actually stand outside, waiting for Naofumi. Naofumi assumes that they're there just to tell him to give Philo to the princess, so he tries to get them to leave. They refuse, and they tell him that they want to fight the waves with him. Naofumi thought that they were trying to gain promotions, or attempt to get close to him so that they could trick him. But after revealing that they're from Ryut, and one was even a demi-human, he becomes slightly less suspicious. During this conversation, he brings up a mechanic that's found in his built-in HUD that allows him to manage party members. It's called battle formations, and it's similar to ones in MMORPGs that organize the positions of guild or clan members so that they can fight in a more orderly fashion. Naofumi thought that if he was to bring them into his group, then this would be the best way to manage them. But we'll get into how this works in just a second. After sending the group off to get the silver to show that they want to fight with him, they actually come back with the money quite quickly. Naofumi accepts them into the group and gives them each an accessory, one of which even had the effect of absorbing a certain level of damage, which he created on accident, so he didn't really mind giving it away. Naofumi then works them into a battle formation. Naofumi would be the leader, followed by Raftalia and Philo, then the young soldier would be what's called the formation leader. This gave the soldier the authority of giving commands, but at the same time, that authority was controlled by Naofumi. It's basically like having a general that relays orders from command to the lower parts of your army. Setting these soldiers at this part of the battle formation also gave Naofumi the ability to decide when they would gain experience or not. He could also cut them loose at any time, meaning if he saw that they intended to betray him, he could quickly break the formation and turn the fight on them. Naofumi then heads to the church to get a class up upgrade. On the way there, he asks both Philo and Raftalia about what they want to upgrade into. Raftalia gives her undecisive answer from the anime, but Philo says she wants to learn how to spit poison, likely because she thought it was cool after recently fighting all these poison-type monsters. It should be pretty clear by now that Philo was quite the impressionable kid. Her growth is visibly being affected by the people and events around her. She's not just some side character that fills the lolly trope, at least not in the novels anyway. If you remember from the anime, Naofumi also tells Raftalia that she needs to choose her own path, cause he won't be around after the waves are done. We're given a bit more context to this. You see, Naofumi didn't feel any particular connection to this world. Yeah, sure, he's helped some people and made new friends, but he didn't feel that it was worth staying here. He thought that if his overall experience in this world was a negative one, then what's the point of staying at all? This prompts Raftalia to ask if she could go with him, but Naofumi just disregards it as being completely ridiculous and changes the subject. They then get to the church, but are denied by royal decree, so the next logical step was to visit the slave trader. If they wanted to get a class up, he recommends that they go to either the country of Siltveld or Schildfrieden, but mentions that building trust with either would take a significant amount of time, and the journey there would be at least a month on foot or 3 weeks by Philo. Before they leave, wanting to make a profit, the slave trader tries to sell some gear for Philo. For things like this, Naofumi would normally go to the weapon shop owner, but the slave trader mentions that only monster trainers can sell proper monster gear, so Naofumi ends up buying iron talons that are meant for flying dragons. Wanting to make sure that they're not a piece of junk, he requests to test them, but all the monsters in the area were either too weak or belonged to the slave trader, so the slave trader brings up a job. Apparently, the nobility of Melromark had used these sewers to raise a monster in secret. Unfortunately, that monster grew too much for them to control, and it got so big that no other control spell would work on it. Its last known level was at 50, but that was some time ago, so it was most definitely higher than that now. Not wanting this monster to be a constant threat to the sewers of the capital, the nobles put in a request to get an adventurer to deal with it, though no one had been able to take care of it as yet. Naofumi accepts the job, and the slave trader guides them to the sewers, where they then come across a monster known as the cream alligator. Naofumi once read a book on how to fight alligators, so he hops on its head to keep its mouth shut. From there, Raftalia and Philo were able to easily take care of it. He absorbs the slain monster's body and gains a nameless shield, though because it wasn't quite as strong as the Chimera Viper shield, he didn't plan on using it much. It did, however, give the interesting effect of improving his ability to fight at night by giving him some form of night vision. They then head back to the slave trader to claim the reward for the job. Before leaving, Naofumi offers to sell him some bandits as slaves, only to find out that the sale of humans is actually illegal in Melromark, though he's told that if he looked hard enough, he could potentially find someone who's willing to buy. But it makes sense though, because remember, Melromark is a human supremacist society, so trading demi-humans would likely be the farthest that you could go. Now, after this was when Naofumi uses the holy water to heal Raftalia. The outcome of the treatment remains rather ambiguous in the anime, but in the novels, we're told that after many nights of constant treatment, Naofumi was able to get the curse lifted from Raftalia's body. The next day, he goes back to the weapon shop, where he's convinced to get an upgrade to his carriage. The old one looked like it was about to fall apart, and Philo seemed like she would be much more excited with a heavier carriage. You see, she'd often get bored if it was too light. So Naofumi gives 10 gold to the shop owner, and tells him to do whatever he can to improve their existing one. Once that was complete, they headed out on their journey where we see a little travel montage. Though not explicitly told, this area here was actually part of the village where he got rid of the bioplant monster, and we can clearly see in the foreground all the food that the village is now able to produce. It's a subtle scene that does well to highlight the contrast and effects that Naofumi has on areas he's been versus the ones that the other heroes have gone to. And that point is pretty much hammered down when he enters the famine-struck village. But before he could get there, he first had to pay a toll. Naofumi tries to negotiate, but to no avail. Raftalia tried to argue, but Naofumi quickly put an end to that too. You see, through Naofumi's time in this new world, he's learned that there were two ways to get what you want. The first was to threaten. If you had the power, you could force people to do pretty much anything. Though this soldier didn't really seem like he'd be persuaded by threats. The second was negotiation, and this typically worked best with antagonistic people. But this soldier didn't seem very antagonistic either. More like he had to do the job he was told or else something bad might happen. So just to test the waters, Naofumi brings up the governor, and sure enough, he gets a reaction from the soldier. You see, you weren't allowed to speak ill of the governor or else there'd be consequences. This allowed Naofumi to connect all the dots. The governor obviously only cared about getting money, and regardless of who you were, you had to pay the toll to get by. So wanting to avoid any future trouble, he just pays the toll and goes on his way. Now, before getting to the town filled with famine-struck immigrants, he stops at a bar in the city where he spots a lot of the governor's thugs as well as Itsuki. Like Naofumi, he was also concealing his identity by keeping the bow in a discreet form. Listening in on their conversation, Naofumi overhears Itsuki talking about teaching the greedy governor a lesson. This caused Naofumi to almost break out in laughter, because simply beating the guy up, then lecturing him on morality surely wouldn't work the way that Itsuki thinks it would. Just look at the revolution that he started in the northern country. Just because he ousted the king doesn't mean the country's famine would go away. As Naofumi said in the anime, acting like some cool vigilante that does one-off acts of justice isn't enough to fix everyone's problems. It's something that highlights Itsuki's mentality and view of the world. He wants to be this hero from the shadows that triumphs over the bad guy. He's not concerned with the aftermath, only with the main objective. Then when he goes to get his reward and finds that it's been claimed by somebody else, he complains that it's been stolen valor, even though it's technically his fault for hiding his identity the entire time. Itsuki can't have it both ways, either gain the recognition and the reward, or stay hidden and gain nothing. As I'm sure you're already aware, there are significant flaws with the ways that the other heroes view this world. They treat it too much like a video game and not enough like the real thing. Naofumi tries to teach them that, but Itsuki was too stubborn to accept that fact. Ren, on the other hand, seemed a little bit more reasonable. When Naofumi was telling him about how he caused a severe plague after slaying the dragon, Ren immediately starts walking east towards the village, as if to try to go there now and remedy the problem. This kind of shocked Naofumi because not only did Ren completely acknowledge what he was saying, but he also showed that he was feeling significant guilt towards the villagers. Ren even bowed an apology to Raftalia after finding out that she was cursed because of his indirect actions. This had changed Naofumi's view of Ren. He always assumed that Ren was a cruel guy who disregards those who are weak, but after seeing that he was visibly concerned about his actions, he now saw Ren to be slightly more compassionate than he initially thought. Then, the final scene after this was when he gets his new Barbarian Armor, titled by the weapon shop owner as Barbarian Armor +1. Its exact stats were defense up, medium attack endurance, strong fire resistance, strong shadow resistance, weak health restoration, medium magic improvement, magic defense procession, and an automatic recovery function. That last one was probably the most important because it's a function that allows the armor to repair itself if it ever broke, a significant improvement to his previous armor. And that's pretty much it for episodes 9 and 10. As we get into the next arc, there's going to be more and more that the anime skipped, as I'm told that the anime has significantly sped up its pacing. So expect a bit longer and more concise videos with regards to complete chapters that were fully cut. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!